This is an abridged version of the making of Syndicate. If you'd rather watch the whole 2-hour 42-minute version, the full documentary is linked below. 1993 was a great time for home computer games, as the Amiga was still relevant, but DOS games on PC were really starting to prove that they were the future of gaming. One game that felt at the forefront of that sense of advancement was Bullfrog's Syndicate, an isometric strategy game set in a bleak dystopian cyberpunk future ruled by ruthless corporations. A future that is sadly as relevant today as it ever was. Today we'll hear from some of the team that made that vision a reality and find out how one of my all-time favourite games was made. I'm on a retro tip, and this is the making of Syndicate. Bullfrog Productions are arguably one of the most memorable names from the early 1990s, particularly on DOS and the Amiga. Based in Guildford in the south of England, Bullfrog was founded in 1987 by Peter Molyneux and Les Edgar. Their first game would be 1988's Fusion, a top-down shooter. This was published by Electronic Arts, who would be their publisher for all their games, eventually purchasing the studio in 1995. After Fusion they struck gold with Populous in 1989. Populous is regarded by many as the birth of an entire genre, having invented the God game. It sold spectacularly well and is one of the top 5 best-selling PC games released before the year 2000. Their next effort was platform game Flood, followed by real-time strategy game Powermonger, both released in 1990. A sequel to Populous came in 1991 with Populous 2: Trials of the Olympian Gods. Then in 1993 came a different kind of isometric game, Syndicate. A real-time strategy game, Syndicate saw the player take control of one of several mega corporations vying for total control of the world. They do this through the use of lethal cybernetically enhanced assassins, whom they can control completely via an implanted microchip. Syndicate painted a bleak picture of the future, leaning heavily into a cyberpunk aesthetic influenced by Blade Runner. While Glenn Corpus created some of Syndicate's levels, the bulk of it was created by Alex Trowers. Glenn was designer on Populous, having inspired the game by creating its isometric blocks. Alex is joining us today, along with lead programmer Sean Cooper. Sean and Alex created most of Syndicate, aside from the game's building blocks, which were created by Bullfrog's artists. Also joining us are Russell Shaw, who composed Syndicate's iconic music and created the sound effects, and Paul Walker, who created Syndicate's jaw-dropping animated intro. Pretty soon it was time for Bullfrog to look to their next game, a game which would be quite the departure from their previous releases. The team recall the genesis of the idea.
Went down the pub. It was one day, I think we'd finished something. What's next, Sean? You know, what's going to be next on the cards? And literally we drew what the start of Syndicate was onto the cliche of a napkin. I mean, it wasn't a piece of paper, it was literally a napkin. I think we had something to eat in this pub. Can't remember the name of the pub, which give a shout out to that if I can remember. But the whole team, Alex was there, Glenn was there, Les and Peter were there. I think a guy called Simon Hunter was there. So the whole sort of Bullfrog sort of team was down the pub, and we just wanted to do this kind of living world. I wanted to do a real-time strategy game. I had so many things in my head. I wanted to do real-time strategy. I wanted it to be I wanted to do cars on roads, right? I think that was the biggest thing. And then I think someone mentioned Blade Runner. That so all of a sudden there was start of things coming in, and I think we named it Bob in the beginning, Blue and Orange Bloke, because I think that's the graphics that Simon drew.
So when I joined in 1990, we were making Powermonger at the time. We'd finished Flood by the time I finally got the job. We'd shipped Flood, so we were making Powermonger. there was an embryonic thing called Cyber Assault on the Amiga, which was like 4 guys clustered around, running around, shooting things. But it was so simple. It was pretty much 2D. Simon Hunter, the artist that Peter didn't like, had made a character, this blue and orange bloke, which is where we get the name Bob from, blue and orange bloke. And I'd done some animations for him, and it was like a side-on platformer. And so that was another avenue that was kind of being talked about for Syndicate. But nothing really started in earnest until we'd finished Populous 2. So after Powermonger, we did like a data disc for Powermonger, then we did Populous 2, and then we did a data disc for that. And towards the end of that, we were like, right, what's our next thing going to be? And the origin of Syndicate was like, so we were talking about revisiting Cyber Assault and briefly this blue and orange bloke, but that was never really serious. We went to the local Pizza Hut, and we just started talking about this thing and the living, breathing city, like everything that we did back then, pretty much. The common theme was kind of voyeuristic. Here is a world. The world works whether you're there or not, right? And this is one of Peter's sort of core tenets. He wants to be able to just look at this world and see that it works and it follows its own rules and it does everything. And then every now and again he wants to poke it with a stick, and we can make some really big and really interesting sticks. But the core tenet is that the world just works. It feels alive, feels like it's greater than the sum of its parts. So trying to simulate a city was a big thing. Then we got the idea to have these kind of the drugs in the head thing, the chip, all came about from the whole, well, we kind of want control over these guys, but we want this degree of ambiguity about it as well. We want them to have their own personality, and for you to be able to change that, so you're just tweaking stuff and then they're reacting accordingly, because that to us was more interesting, that make this guy shoot those things and don't do anything unless I've told you to do it. No, we wanted them to do their own thing and react, and you would just tweak the parameters as you went. So there was that. The Pizza Hut is also where we came up with the Persuadertron, so that the extrapolation of, so if everyone's got this thing in their head, what if somebody hacked it? Oh, well, let's have a thing that hacks it, and so on and so forth. And then that was the kind of genesis of it.
Was it a Pizza Hut or was it a pub? We'll let Alex and Sean argue that one between themselves. The bulk of the art was created by Paul McLaughlin and Chris Hill, both of whom are sadly no longer with us. The front-end graphics for the menus and so on was created by Phil Jones.
We had some absolute brilliant pixel pushers. People like Paul joined shortly after I did, and he became the art director and has basically been Peter's art director ever since. He died a few years ago, which, by the way, that is another common theme. We are aging out of this industry, but quick. But his pixel art was amazing. He could like turn his style to be anything. So if somebody else had already produced the art or produced some art for it, he could mimic that, and suddenly we're able to expand the art assets massively.
I think Paul sort of joined us in 1990 or 91, or Paul McLaughlin. I don't think he's with us now because I think he passed away. And he followed Peter all the way through to 22 Cans. And that's where the real sort of art started to come in.
Paul was also a driving force behind the decision to take Syndicate down the cyberpunk route, heavily influenced by Blade Runner, with his art influencing the vibe of the game.
It was all Paul. It was he loved Sid Mead stuff. He loved Blade Runner, and it was like, how do we make Blade Runner? Let's do this thing. So yeah, all of the visual style of it, the setting, all kind of stemmed from Paul's lead on this, and we went with it because, oh yeah, that sounds really, really cool. Like there was a point, and this may have been actually before Paul arrived, where it was going to be much more military, your crack special forces, when it was Cyber Assault, your crack special forces, what have you. But then the idea that there was this corporations, the idea that it was people who could almost blend in as civilians, like the look of the agents. And I always loved it. And Paul went into so much detail with that. Like all of their skin is this, they get covered in rubber to give them more durability, and then they've got this mask so you can't see just how horribly disfigured they are, and the sunglasses, and the trench coat is there because it's really good for concealing the weapons, and there's this whole thing like that. But it's that his kind of attention to detail on that and the setting. The thing that always kind of struck me was his lighting model for it, because obviously there's no in-game lighting, there's no dynamic lights or anything like that, but the way he did everything, so instead of everything being lit from the top down, there was always this conceit that the ground was really bright because of all the street lights, but as soon as you get a couple of blocks up, everything just fades to blackness, and it's always like night sky, night city. But so it was night without you ever actually looking up and seeing that the sky was dark, but it was always the tops of the buildings were always dark, and all of the interesting stuff and all the interesting silhouettes, or sort of reverse silhouettes that you get down at the city level. The idea that would be insanely light polluted because, you know, the city is 24/7. People are always out on the streets. But yeah, it was all, can we do Blade Runner? And then something that the press really latched onto, like when they'd come and they'd look at it, they'd be playing Syndicate, and then they'd step out of the office, because we were all up on the research park then, and they'd go, oh, you've just basically modelled it on this. And we hadn't really. I mean, there must have been some kind of osmosis there, but it was uncanny, and I think it really used to unnerve a bunch of people that they just spent all this time like in this dystopian future, and then they step out and the research park, the technology centre where they happen to be standing, looks just like it, and they're like, oh, this is a little unsettling.
Development would start on Amiga but moved to PC.
We started on the Commodore. The Commodore that I think had 1,000 or 2,000 or something. We started on the Commodore, the development of this game Bob, right? And then soon we quickly moved to PC, because we realized that the growth of PC was quite something, and that means we could move to sort of 640 by 400, or maybe it was 480, which was high res, which back then was high res. I mean, it's barely a thumbnail on your iPhone these days, but and it was 16 color, so that the art team were convinced that they could get the color through dithering, to sort of up the, but it did give it a really nice look, having that limited color palette, I think. So we moved to 286. Quickly the 386 came along. We moved to the 386, so going from 16-bit to 32-bit registers, and then I think we moved to 486 right towards the end.
And we started building it on the Amiga, but it became very apparent really early doors that we weren't going to be able to do all the things that we wanted to do on the Amiga. And so it came at this sort of turning point where that's when we decided to jump to PC, because the PC got very exciting. It was powerful. You know, this 386 was an absolute beast, and we're like, ooh, we want to get kind of involved in that. B, the other core sort of Bullfrog tenet was we make multiplayer games first. We take a game concept, we make it as a multiplayer game, and we play it against each other. And by doing so, as long as you've got the technical side sorted, the network communication stuff sorted, it's a lot easier to make changes to the game where you're not having to rewrite an opponent, where you can just go to the human, okay, let's play it in this style now, or what happens if you don't use those things, or what happens if you only use those things, what happens if, how does that feel, how does that change the game, can we make missions out of that, can we make levels that sort of revolve around that principle, oh, this feature's bugged and is OP, right, nobody used that. It's a lot easier to say that than to go in and change all the code and then redistribute it and then jump through all of those hoops, right? So the fact that the PCs were able to do 8-player rather than us having these serial cables draped across the office so we could play 2-player, which was still fun, but it was a very appealing thing to us.
Alex and Sean would host after pub and weekend gameplay sessions with their friends to play test the game and would adjust the game's parameters on the fly.
And this is why, by the way, when people ask, what was your favourite game? I always say Syndicate. Simply because of, like, we'd go to the pub on a Friday with our mates, and then after the pub kicked us out, we'd go back to the office to play Syndicate with our mates, right? So this is like 11 o'clock, half 11 on a Friday night. We've rocked up the office with like 3 or 4 of our mates, and we start just playing Syndicate. And then somebody goes, oh, what if you could do this? And we go, oh, that's an interesting idea. And then Sean goes, all right, like, give us 15 minutes, and he writes a new version. Right, new version's up, and I've built a new mission to do it, or a new layout or something, or we've built a new weapon, or we've built a new what have you. And then everybody plays it again. They go, oh, yeah. Hey, what about this? Oh, that was really cool. That worked well last time. Let's try this one now. And we would do that until somebody realised that it was light outside. Now it's Sunday morning, and we've spent the whole weekend doing this. And it wasn't crunch, because no one was making us do this. It was just, we got excited by it, and people were enjoying the process, and the game that fell out at the end of it happened to be the better for it.
Yeah, I'd love to be a fly on the wall, be watching us play on the weekends. When I used to get my friends in, we used to get some beers, some pizzas and stuff, and basically lock them in for the weekend and get them to play it multiplayer to death. You know, and you just hear the feedback. Oh, that's shit. This is a shit game. Yeah, but why? Why? Just tell me why it's shit. Oh, because I couldn't do anything about that. He just killed me, and I couldn't do anything about it. Okay, let me change. Let me go to my computer. Right, give us 5 minutes. Make a new build. Push it to everyone's machines via disk. Right, here's a disk. Put it in your machine, run that, put this disk in your machine, run that. Right, and let's play it again. And eventually the shits, the call outs, oh, this is a shit game, were more silent, right? It was more like, shit, get out of there. Right, quick, run. Oh, stop that. You know, it was more that sort of language. And we knew that by playing it and testing and playing, that we could really hone that, you know, what made the game. I used to get quite excited for Monday because I'd be working the whole weekend to try and get it done. But I used to work I still do. I'm a workaholic when it comes to creating stuff. I would work all the time. Eventually I had my machine at home. I think 1992 I had a machine at home, so I could take my disc home and continue, you know, developing it at home. But such joy of just being able to tune things to make it more perfect.
The team would play Syndicate after hours not only for the betterment of the game, but because they wanted to.
The extent to it being so much fun was by the time we were finishing Syndicate off, we'd expanded the company a lot, and there were several people in the office now for whom this was, air quotes, just a job. They loved doing it, but for them it was a 9 to 5, you know, and they would clock off and they would go home because they had things like, you know, family and other things that they wanted to do. And to start with, I really couldn't understand that. I was like, why are you here? Why are you doing this? Why aren't you drinking the same Kool-Aid as everyone else? But I understand it 100% now. But they were staying after hours to play the game. And multiplayer, and every lunchtime we would set up at least one game, but there were too many people were trying to get on that one game, and if you weren't on it at lunchtime, if you weren't on it right at the start of lunchtime, you didn't get in, so you'd have to set up another game and hope that you got another critical mass of people to do it. But that's when we knew we had something really, really good, was when even the people for whom this is just a job were going, I want to play that. We were like, holy crap, this is excellent.
Design things that we created, you know, just from playing, and it'd be really, do you know what would be really cool? It'd be really cool to do this. Lots of those kind of moments from lots of people, right? Just by playing. And I guess as time moves on, you play less. You know, as you move through the sort of as I moved through my career, I think the last game I worked on, I didn't even play it. You know, that's the difference. I worked and I played. I played more than I worked. Because that was the nature of that we had to do that. It was the same for Magic Carpet. It was the same for all the other games that I worked on at Bullfrog. We played them as much as we worked on them, and we were writing games that we enjoyed playing. Right.
In the end, the multiplayer aspect would have to be cut from the game before release, not appearing until the American Revolt expansion.
100% we intended to release with the multiplayer. The day that Sean decided to pull it was a very sad day indeed, and we were all arguing, no, we can't do that. It's because, in all honesty, it's the best way of playing Syndicate. It's incredible, and to this day it really grinds my gears that so many people who are going, oh, I really like Syndicate, never got to play it multiplayer because it was only on the PC, and it was only on the PC if you bought the data disc. So that's like a subset of a subset, and it should have been everybody was playing it like this, because boy, that was so much fun.
I cut it from the game because I couldn't make it work properly. I couldn't make it stable enough. And we were using NetBIOS at the time, and I think the numbers were too small as well. So I think it wasn't a hard argument to have, that we don't think we should compromise the drive, what EA called the drive windows for release, that we shouldn't compromise that to hold it for the multiplayer, just so that a handful of people can play it multiplayer. It was a very good tool for us to use in the game.
Another iconic Amiga game that released in 1993 was Sensible Software's Cannon Fodder, which coincidentally used a similar context-sensitive cursor, again using the left mouse button to move the team and the right to shoot.
And that's a case of sort of convergent evolution. Like we weren't playing their stuff, and they weren't playing ours. They came out so close together, and both of their systems had to have originated at around the same time. But yeah, but the fact that it was like, and if it's on a car, you're going to go and get in the car, and if it's on a weapon, you were going to go and pick up the weapon. And there were edge cases, like when there was a weapon drop where the car was. Well, no, then one of them would take priority, and you either had to move the car first, then pick the weapon up, or But by and large, it worked really, really well.
Yeah, that was funny, wasn't it? I remember playing it, and I just remember thinking, it's like they had a spy, sort of watching us, because I didn't know anything about that game until someone put it on my desk and said, well there was some write-up about it, and then we were just about to launch Syndicate, and I remember going, oh, this is like 4 blokes, or whatever it was, and I remember playing that. It was awesome. It was great. It's such a great game.
Everything would have to be built from the ground up for Syndicate, including the engine and tools.
It was all built from scratch, and again, it had to be, because this is the first thing we built on PC. Glenn was our engine guy. He was always our engine guy, but and I was under the impression that he'd basically written the engine for this, and Sean had kind of taken it over and tweaked it. But it turns out that's not necessarily true, and Sean had done most of the legwork, thanks to a lot of heavy-duty conversations with Glenn. The main issues we had with it were the 3D-ness of it and how much we could draw at any one time. So, in point of fact, the game is basically, it's a background. When you scroll, we only ever render the edges, and then we shift the whole lot, so we're not redrawing all of those blocks again. It's an image that moves, and then we just redraw the edges. But then the problem comes when things have to walk behind other things, so we're constantly having to redraw the blocks that we're standing in front of, and then we have to kind of work our way back up the the tree of all of the blocks that could now be obscuring you, and go, do I need to draw something else here? And so there was this routine called cover sprite, which like 90% of the rendering code was that one routine to make this as efficient as possible. And it was an absolute ball ache for them to do it, because the other thing is, we were one of the, at the time where we came out, we were one of the only games who were doing it in, and I'm going to use the words, high res, 640 by 400. We were, like most of the other games, would just do the MCGA stuff and the 320 by 256. But yeah, so we only had the 16 colors, and we did it in the 640 480. But because the screen was that much bigger, obviously rendering everything was a no-no in terms of frame rate. So yeah, it is optimized to high heaven, and is very specific to that one view at that one moment in time. So it's not, yeah. Obviously, like later on when we started doing things like Magic Carpet, and it's a lot more freeform, and you've got a lot more freedom over where you can put the camera and the kind of things that you can show. It comes with its own limitations, but yeah, it was a really interesting technical exercise, and Sean was brilliant at it, especially if you consider that was only his second game. Like, he'd made Flood, and he kind of cut his teeth on Flood, which was the water physics notwithstanding, was a relatively simple game. But it was a solved problem, right? It's a platform game. Everyone knows how you write platform games. No one really knows how you write this city simulator action shooty thing, you know, and certainly not with the technical restrictions that we were going for. So,
you know, building countless tools, things like character creator editors, so we could draw body parts, you know, the legs, the bodies and the heads, and then interchange them, and we'd stick them into this editor and get them into the game to sort of up the variation. Which I talk a lot about that today, because that's what I work in now. I work in character AI and automation and character creation. And this is kind of where my love of that started, you know, where you were just trying to create as many combinations as cheaply as possible, and to try and fit it in memory. And it's exactly the same thing today. It's just that we had a different challenge back then, because we had, I think, 640 megabytes, 640K, wasn't it, or something? I can't even remember what. It wasn't anywhere near megabytes. Yeah, so it was in Ks, not megabytes. I mean, just imagine we had megabytes back then. So we had to fit it in, you know, and it doesn't go a long way, right? 640K. You know, it's not even 1,000 by what is that? If you did 1,000 by 1,000 pixels with 1 byte, you wouldn't fit in memory. You know, so it's just mind-boggling how we actually got it, how we actually got it into memory. Meanwhile, we were developing this isometric engine to allow this stacking of these bricks to build up the scene. And then we started creating level editors and a world builder, right? So we could copy and paste, we could create buildings, and then we could paste them into the world. And I think that was quite a big step, you know, back then. It sped it up a bit, because we were struggling, I think, to sort of try and build things in quick enough. So you want to empower your level designers, get Alex the tools that he needs to start building out the levels. Nothing seemed challenging. I was limited by knowledge, but I didn't feel I can do anything. Right, it's been my attitude all my life, up until about, you know, as soon as you turn 50, you go, oh shit, I can't be a football player anymore. But I've never let anything limit or chat. You know, it wasn't so challenging. It was more limiting, right? It was limiting in knowledge. But I think the challenges, I think, around development, right, and manpower to build things, to focus on content and build things fast, right? So that you can test your iteration times. If you can just produce something and then play it and then throw it away, That's power. And I think the other side of it was the character editor. Just being able to, intermatch these things and then produce lots of this variation in the game. I think that was, those were the two things that I remember building that I thought made a difference, right? It really made, and by using them, right? So writing these tools and then being able to use them and go, that's really cool. Just mock up. I can quickly mock up a map and not have brick by brick by brick, to place down to build something. So that was, I think that was, that felt really good, as well as building the game, but building the tools as well was something I really enjoyed, and it's something I enjoy today. It's probably the most favorite part of game development is developing the tools that allow you to build the game design. And if you're the game designer and the engineer, then you can just hone it to that idea of, because you're going, oh, I know exactly how quickly I want to build it, and then you just change it. You just create code and create these editors to match that desire of, sort of building these things out.
Alex would build the levels from modular building blocks made by Paul McLaughlin.
So to start with, the editor that we built was slow. It felt slow to put things together. So I thought, if we could create like some bigger building bricks, so we've got these isometric bricks that are the small part. If we can build those into bigger blocks of content and then just paste them around and have it merge them all in just by a bit like D-Paint. I think I was inspired by D-Paint, because you paint some pixels and then you could select an area and you could paint that group of pixels. So it took that principle, and basically you designed this thing in this building editor, like a voxel editor almost, and then you saved it, and now it was a brush, right? And now you can bring it into the world and paste it around. So all of a sudden, worlds were very quickly knocked up. So Alex would go, right, I've got this level for lunch. All right. Let's get it on everyone's machines then, and let's play it, and let's see what it's like. And that really empowered the sort of the kind of, marching it forward to build out the game.
That's one of the reasons why I really loved working with Paul. Just because, again, right. So there were a number of different artists on the original Syndicate. Paul was the lead art. Chris had basically done most of the unit sprites and everything. And then there were a couple of others, like Mike came on and he was mainly doing the console version and portraits and stuff like that. But most, if not all, of the blocks were done by Paul. And because he was technically so good, like he had a really good idea, he had a really good eye for what the system could and couldn't do and how you could exploit it. The blocks that he made would always have several uses, and even down to the fact that so a block consists of three faces. You've got the two wall bits, and then you've got the roof bit on the top, and he would make them in such an interesting modular way that I could use this as a roof, or I could use it as a pavement, or I could use it as a river, or I could use it and it would have so many different permutations. But what I loved about him was he wasn't precious about any of them. So if at any point in time he would build a structure and cut it up into blocks, and he would cut it up in such a way that made sense to him to make that structure. But if I then came and went and put it in upside down, and it made something that was very close to, oh, actually that could be an interesting thing, he was not precious about it at all, and he would go back in and tweak his blocks to make sure that it worked that way and the way that he wanted it to work. And there was this wonderful back and forth between the pair of us, where it was basically an artistic, wouldn't it be cool if, oh hey, can we have one that does this? Oh, I'll make that. And then he's made the thing to specifically do that. And then we thought of, but hang on, if we put it over here, it can now do this as well. So yeah, it was wonderful, but it was very much it was an iterative process, and it was a back and forth process, but there was no ego involved with him at all. He would be there were a lot of artists, certainly later on as well, who they get upset if you don't show off the thing that they've just made the way they want it shown off. And you can see examples of this as well, when everybody just started getting into rendering, like the 3D stuff and the pre-rendered stuff and everything. The artists would spend so long making this wonderful thing, and it looked fantastic, and they would demand a camera has to spin around this thing and it has to show it off, and these things just took too long. They then needed what they needed but never got was somebody external to come in and essentially edit it. And because when you're the guy who's made the thing and want to show the thing off, you're not in any way objective about how other people are going to perceive it, or how it should be shown off, right? And so yeah, and for the longest time, games never had that kind of editorial step where you'd go, no, we should just, less is more, right? It was always more is more, let's do more. But we didn't get that with Paul, which was brilliant. Well, personally for me, I thought that was fantastic.
These building blocks and the other tools created by Sean allowed Alex to create levels and missions very quickly.
And then we started with a couple of levels, placing things down, see how it worked, get some cars in there, jump into cars, put 256 people into cars and then get them out again. Kind of strange, but it didn't matter. It was just all part of the game.
I say I built all of the missions. Glenn, I think, built a handful as well, but there are 50 missions in total. It would be me coming up with the missions themselves, and I would do everything from building the map to populating the map to defining the characteristics of the mission. It was all very, very modular, though. There was a guy called Phil Jones. He wrote all of the AI for the enemy agents, and all I would do is say an enemy squad starts here and it's this big. And then that was it. I would have no more control over what they would. I wouldn't script. There was no scripting then, so it wasn't a case of then I would say at such and such a time this guy appears, or at such and such a time this thing happens. All I would do is set up the initial parameters of the mission. And I think actually I could tell, like, mission objective guys, go here, go here, go here, walk along this path, but that was about it. But I think that's why people accept it so much, is because each mission was just a set of opening parameters and they're free to solve it however they want, and that's very, very empowering for the person. And as long as you make it clear, look, this is what the objective is, now you go and do it, and it's not go here and do this, then do that, then do the next thing. It's no, here's all the things, and as long as at the end of it that's destroyed, that's still alive, that thing's on fire, happy days, right? And I always liken it to, like, it's the difference between X-Wing or TIE Fighter and Squadrons. They're essentially exactly the same game, but the missions in X-Wing and TIE Fighter were, at this point these ships are going to arrive, make sure that those ones are dead, go! Whereas in Squadrons, it's, right, now you've got to go and blow this thing up, and then you can go and blow that thing up, and you can't go and blow that thing up before you've blown this thing up, not because it doesn't make sense in the world, it physically won't let you do that. That thing won't blow up until you've blown this thing up, and it's that level of contrivance and that level of rigidity that kind of makes people bounce off it. Whereas with Syndicate, it was just like, hey, go nuts, buddy, here's a city, please make sure that guy's dead. I love it when a game promotes this kind of discussion where people will vehemently say, this is the way you should do it, and then somebody else says, no, this is the way you should do it, and they're both right, but they can't see that the other person is right, and they are vehemently defending their position. No, you're an idiot, you've got to do it like this. But no, I can do it like this, and can't you see how much easier that is? No, I can't. And they get that discussion, and what we used to refer to as the water cooler moments, where, hey, did you did you get to the bit where you do this? No, I didn't see that one, because their version of the game is different to your version of the game because of how they've played it. And it gives people a lot more, it gives people this sort of ownership over it that you don't get in almost any other medium, right? And so that's super, super exciting to me.
The living, breathing world which was so important to the game would need people. Characters in-game could use one of 3 flavours of AI: civilians, friendly and enemy agents, and police.
There are 2, I guess you'd call them pawns. There are 2 sort of objects, and they both look like agents. Some of them, the ones that are static, are just that. They're just civilians who look like agents who... Well, actually, no, they're not civilians. They'll be marked as police with their initial set to idle, so they stand there. And the AI of the game and the living, breathing city, it's all smoke and mirrors, right? Obviously, we couldn't simulate a whole city then. Nowadays, it would be still smoke and mirrors, but way more mirrors and much, much smaller mirrors. Although we still can't do smoke or mirrors. It's crazy. But anyway, so any unit in the game would have a very simple set of parameters. They would belong to one of the factions, so either one of the corporations or police or civilians, and then all that did was determine how they reacted when something entered a sort of perception range of them. And where something, that was anything that's carrying a gun. So civilians would run away from anything that's carrying a gun. Police would pull their gun out and go into I need to shoot whatever's carrying the gun mode. And enemy agents would do the same, but would also have this layer of, whilst you haven't noticed anything that's carrying a gun, be trying to move towards this area over here because that's where the player is, right? And that's it. The civilians that were part of the living, breathing city and them going about their daily lives and walking around the city was literally them picking a random direction to walk in every couple of, and walking in that way until they hit an obstacle, then picking a random direction to walk in, and off they went again. We had grand plans for, they would live in these houses and they would have, so this would be marked as a house for them and this would be marked as an office, and in the morning they'd go that way and they'd go into the, and then in the evening they'd come back, but we just never got around to writing any of that, and we didn't need to. Like it's not something that, I mean, you would totally do that these days, and you'd be able to procedurally generate lives for these people, but it was just swapping these tiny little states. And even with those like simple 3 levers of sort of faction, state and awareness, we were able to kind of pull this off. But yeah, so the ones who were static weren't technically agents, they were police who looked like agents, so they would react in a, oh, I can see the player and he's got a gun out, let me get my gun out and I'll shoot him.
And then getting the civilians to move, to wander around the city. I remember the navigation system being particularly difficult, and especially when I look at Unity and Unreal today, it's just, it comes with it. It's really easy to use, and we had wall hugging, and that was it. That was our navigation system. Yeah, it was a shortfall really of not enough engineers, or maybe experienced. Or just having known methods, right? I mean, today there's like, it's like stacks. You can pick from 100 different types of navigation systems, and they've all been sort of proven and developed. We had nothing, right? It was because, and I think the lack of the internet and the lack of documentation, trying to find others that were, we weren't networking with game developers, right, to get information about how to do stuff. So knowledge was coming in through Peter. He'd been somewhere, someone had mentioned something. Oh, we can use this wall hugging. Oh, okay, yeah, okay. How's that work? Right, yeah, I get you. I get the principle. So there was all those kind of. There wasn't enough information flowing, and then I think as we started, post Syndicate, as we started to grow, all of a sudden the people were coming in. We were going to shows. We were talking to other people. We were looking at other games with very critiquing what they're trying, what they were doing. So it grew, but I think I was quite naive. I mean, I was 20, 21, 22 when it was released. And I didn't know enough, right? Like I knew how to, I could imagine the game and try and put it together in the best of my ability, whilst trying to learn 386, and 486 and C at the time. So it was all quite naive, I would say. 10 years, and I had a lot of that stuff was just, easy. It was a lot easier. Even 5 years on, things were a lot easier. But I was still learning. And I think the living, breathing city. Even I wrote the AI that moved these people around the map, and even I felt that they were they were going somewhere for some purpose. So I'd been bought into this idea they were a little bit real. In my naivety, whatever, even though I know I coded it, right? And I still believed that they were going home or going to work. It's kind of ridiculous, but.
As well as the core gameplay, Syndicate had myriad other working parts, such as the management aspects of the game, for example researching new weapons and technology. These two sides of the game would need to marry up.
Yeah, you forget all these very intricate parts. We did a mini map, that went through many iterations to try and get it to actually give information that was helpful. Because I think without it, it wouldn't have been as good. Things like the Persuadertron and building your team, and capturing these agents so you could take them back and use them. Phil Jones was working on the front end, all the green screens, getting all that done. And then we connected up the two pieces of code together, the game and this front end bit. They were very detached, right? So it didn't really know much about it. And then we just built this tiny little interface that could say, oh, you've brought this many agents back, or you're taking these agents in. And I thought it was quite clever because it was really hard to manage. We didn't have Git or anything, right? Didn't have any sort of repo that could merge this stuff together. So we had to try and keep it separate as much as we could in the front end. So in the game, we had something that would play it, so it would remember what we've done, and then we could just have it do it over and over and over and over and over again to check determinism, right? One thing. But it was good for the network stuff because it means you didn't have to have a connection. You could just record what you're doing, play it for an hour, and then fast forward it from start all the way through to see if any of the checksums change and stuff. So there was the start of that kind of automation of testing to see what goes wrong, right? By redoing. I mean, we could have done more of that in the front end side. And then, you could have just run different scenarios against it, which is what we would do today, right? It's exactly what we would do today. You just run it overnight and just have it blitz out everything and go, right, there's a problem here. You're getting this fall off. People can cheat it by doing this, but we just didn't. Again, it was naivety. We didn't have the information.
The metagame, the free research thing, is probably our biggest misstep. Certainly from my perspective, that's our biggest misstep in the game, because that means that by the time you play this mission, you could have miniguns and rocket launchers and lasers, or you could not have miniguns and rocket launchers and lasers. So how do I balance that mission for that? And you could exploit it as well, because you could just leave it on the research screen until you'd researched all the things. It just kind of breaks the game. So we would need to bin off the sort of real-timey nature of that. It's not quite real-time, but we would need to bin that off and have these discrete chunks of, at this juncture you can do this, and that means I know that you can get to these missions within this envelope of equipment loadouts, or I'd have to build that mission in such a way that there was a load of stuff in the mission itself that says if he's carrying one of these, then let's spawn 3 extra guys, that kind of thing, which we didn't We didn't have that at the time, and I don't think it's something we considered. Again, this was still pretty embryonic in terms of what we would take for granted these days, and certainly in terms of what we had available for like scripting and things like that, where they can be much more bespoke, but bespoke in a sort of broader sense, or, you know, broad strokes of this mission needs to be tweaked to account for that. Yeah, but we just didn't exist. So the simplest thing would have been, what if we just didn't do the meta, and the meta was more linear?
Yeah, well, again, naivety. I mean, we did build some tests. Like, if you up this, then you have to put this down. You know, so sort of like trying to balance the statistics of it, and then you could test against it, right? If this is too high, you get this punishment for it, etc. I think it was hard to balance.
Weapon research would unlock some fun new guns for the agents. One of the most iconic was the explosive and hugely fun Gauss gun.
And then just add in a weapon, right? We're gonna add a rocket launcher, right? I think we're gonna need this, and and someone like Chris Hill or Paul McLaughlin would go, well, we could do like smoke like this. Oh yeah, that's a really good idea. And then you could use like your explosions, Sean, the way you've done your explosions, we could just sort of push them out, in using a velocity, so it looks like it's traveling a lot faster and stuff. And then lots of sprites on, you've seen some of the explosions. I've been a big fan of that sort of, just having lots of things moving on screen, because it just sort of, it gets that kind of, it just looks, it doesn't look awesome, but the impact of it is awesome, right? You just blow everything away.
Now, originally, or the way we'd spec'd it out, is I said that the Gauss gun, because we were going to have all this cybernetic stuff, the Gauss gun was like an EMP weapon. It would only affect cyborgs, so regular civilians or regular humans or military people who didn't have any enhancements wouldn't be affected by it at all. And we just never got round to putting it in. So there was this button there. We'd got an icon for it, but we knew that it didn't do anything at the moment. And then one of these evenings, Sean has made this explosion and gone, I wonder what I can do with that. And then he's made this rocket launcher. And because that was a spare button, we put it on that. And we were playing with it in the evening going, oh, this is really, really cool. Then we didn't tell anyone. And then the next morning, we still haven't told anyone. And we get to lunchtime, which is where we normally do our playthroughs of the game, and we start up the multiplayer game, and of course only me and Sean know that this thing exists, and so we bought up a whole stack of these Gauss guns, and everyone else has just ignored that button because they know that button doesn't do anything. And we get into the game and we just start hammering them with these things, and they're like, what the is going on? What's that? How do you make that? And we have to stop the game, and everyone's like, right, now start again, which one do I have to buy? And then that was it, we were off to the races. And it only came about because of one of these evening sessions where Sean's just decided to kind of put this thing in.
Another fun weapon that became not only an amusing distraction but a vital tool for completing many missions was the ingenious Persuadertron. This could be used to persuade corporate executives, recruit enemy agents, or even just amass an enormous civilian human shield.
So actually, right, credit where credit is due, Peter came up with the Persuadertron in the first place, right? And I believe that was its first implementation, and we just stuck with it. And there was a huge question mark over, hang on, this doesn't make sense. Certainly when it got to things like vehicles, and everybody would pilot this vehicle, and you turn up and you go, right, everybody out, and then like 50 people get out of this tiny hatchback. And I was like, this doesn't make sense. But it was fun. And it's a game, so therefore fun has to win over making sense. And people were happy to kind of suspend their disbelief just because it was so awesome when you did pull that off. Like one of the main tactics in the multiplayer, because obviously everybody shows up on the scanner except if they're in a vehicle. So one of the main tactics was you would climb into a car, and then you would click on an inaccessible part of the map, and the vehicle would try to get there. It had to adhere to the roads, and it would just drive around the city, acting like a normal vehicle. So you wouldn't stand out as a vehicle filled with 30 death-dealing crackhead civilians, right? And then as soon as your route took you past where you could see an enemy squad was moving, you'd try and act like, pull up discreetly and then just pile everybody out to go ha ha ha. Yeah, it was a lot of fun, but it wasn't planned. Having those moments weren't planned; they were all emergent, which again it's a byproduct, a wonderful byproduct of this whole. All we're going to do is establish the rules. We don't have an end game in mind. We don't have a grand plan for any of this. What we've got are interesting rule sets that react nicely with each other and are as robust as we can make them. Obviously, some things will fall through the crack, but as long as you build it in a modular and robust fashion, who knows what you're going to come out with at the end, but I guarantee it's going to be interesting. It's definitely going to be something you're going to want to watch.
It's difficult to think of Syndicate without hearing its iconic music composed by Russell Shaw. Starting at Bullfrog was a baptism of fire for Russell, having to learn everything from scratch. Composing in this way was far more limiting than what he was accustomed to.
It was sort of left to me to work out for myself how I would put audio into the game. And we came across a company called Miles Sound System. John Miles was a guy from the States who'd written this sound system that you plug into DOS and it runs with a DOS extender. This was pre-Windows, obviously, so all our games ran on DOS at that time. And the Miles Sound System allowed you to play sounds in the game. But you could only play one sound at a time. There was no mixing of sounds, so you had to really carefully think about what sounds were most important as you were playing, what sounds cut off other things, how much sound you could fit into memory, because I think I had something like between 100 and 200k kilobytes of memory for the whole of the audio for Syndicate. Yeah, so everything had to be 8-bit, 11 kilohertz samples, mono. It allowed you to address more memory than DOS generally would allow. Sean would be your guy to tell you exactly what that means, but it just allowed you to load a game into memory which wouldn't fit within normal DOS sizes. And then for music, obviously it was pure FM. Just create your own synthesizer which gets loaded into the game with your own sounds that you design with an FM design module, and then that plays MIDI in the game, which triggers your own synth that you just made. It was a bit of a culture shock, because coming from the music industry to realizing, oh crikey, this is basically what I'm up against now. I'm going to be using this synth forever. And it was one of those things that I had to learn how to get the best out of what I'd been given. So designing those sounds was quite tricky. On the Amiga, we had to use a mod. We had to use a mod player. I had to create all the instruments that were playing with an FM chip on a PC, but create them and load them into the mod player, so that when it played the music, it sort of sounded quite similar, although not exact. And the Amiga, it was very much a case of just do the best with what you've got here, because it wasn't as good as the PC, obviously. And but still, the Amiga at that time was huge. There were just so many of them out there, and of course, Populous had come out on the Amiga. And Peter was keen to sort of Powermonger, I think, was on the Amiga, so Peter was really keen to sort of make sure that fan base was catered for. So I had to sort of just do my best to recreate what we were hearing on the PC on the Amiga.
Syndicate has only 3 main pieces of music: the intro, the in-game music called Assassinate, and the danger music.
There's the ambient sort of stuff, and then the danger track. I think there might have been an outro track as well. But at that time, I was still learning the ropes. I was still trying to get to grips with the tech. And so looking back on it, I probably would have done much more if I'd have been more au fait with the whole process of it all. But you know, we played with it a lot, and we said, you know what, it sounds pretty good actually. Let's not muck around with the soundtrack. Let's just go with what we've got now. There was another game at that time that came out called Alone in the Dark, and we realised that they too had only 1 or 2 tracks of music in there, because the whole idea of making music with an FM chip is really time consuming. You have to sit down and make each instrument. It's not like you're given an array of instruments, you just play them. You actually make the instrument, and then you had to like convert the MIDI track into something that Miles sound system could use, and then there were different FM chips on different PCs depending on what card you had. So you had like your basic FM, you had something called an OPL3 chip. I think it was called an OPL3. It's the ad-lib chip, which was the basic one. So basically, the music was sounding different from depending on what machine it was being played on. And so that sort of consumed a lot of my time in terms of making sure that what was there was solid.
As the danger music would trigger whenever enemy agents were near, it would need to transition seamlessly with the other in-game music.
I must admit that every game I've ever worked on, that's been one of the main things I've always wanted to do, was to make the transition from one track to another in musical terms, A, seamless, and B, musically sort of apt, like it was meant to be. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, and Syndicate was one of the first, because it was the first game I'd ever worked on. I really wanted to get that feeling of the music feels like it's just gone into a different branch, rather than, oh, we're stopping that piece of music and we're going into this piece. And even now, even the games I work on now, it's still one of my tenets, if you like. One of the leading things that I like to do is to make it feel smooth, like it's like you're watching a movie. That's always been very important to me. Thematically, they're the same sort of timbre, using the same sort of instruments. I can't remember on Syndicate whether we did the beat matching. You can beat match as well, so you can make sure that it happens on a certain bar. I'm pretty sure that was in there actually in Miles' system, where you could beat match. Yeah, I mean, nowadays we've got interactive music systems in Wise that I can do all sorts of incredible things musically that would have been a dream back then. But yeah, no, it's good nowadays.
Russell managed to create a soundtrack that never outstays its welcome, despite having only 2 in-game tracks. He went for a moody, atmospheric style to complement the cyberpunk theme.
Like I say, I was very limited by the FM chip and knowing what I could do with the instruments on it. I wanted something that was dark and moody, and FM and dark and moody don't really go together. So I just wanted to get an idea of atmospheric music, not necessarily just plonking away a tune in the background, but something which is just playing, you know, as a backdrop to what you're watching, rather than, you know, a musical piece. And so consequently, the music just sort of wrote itself as I was producing these instruments. I was just thinking, oh, this sustain. I've got a keyboard here, by the way, which is why it feels like it is basically I hear the instrument that I just created or tweaked, and musical ideas would come from that. and yeah, some of the FM instruments that I created for that were quite novel at the time. I don't think many games had done that style of FM chip stuff. Again, Alone in the Dark came out and they'd used the FM chip, but it was very tuneful. It was actual sort of almost like jazz music, if you like. And I didn't want to go down that route at all. I just wanted it to be atmospheric and sustainy. You know, it quickly became obvious to me that doing sort of twinkly sounds on synthesizers wasn't going to work for this game. It had to be quite dark because of the nature of cyberpunk, really. So I decided to just go down that route of dark, moody style music, and seemed to work quite well. Yeah, it's strange because I listen back to it now and I just think, oh, what I could do with that game now if I had the sound system I have now. But given the sort of technical challenges that we had then, I think it came out all right actually. And well, it was a #1 game. It did really well for us, So, and a lot of people look at it fondly. So it came out all right.
Russell also created the sound effects for Syndicate. To do so, he drew on his experience working in television.
But I came from obviously working in the film industry and TV industry. I came at it from that direction. So I was looking at making real sounds from sample libraries and making my own. Like for instance, like the minigun, I think was a dentist drill with with a actual machine gun, and played together. They formed like the whirring noise of the machine gun of the minigun. But I'd have to see it first. So if it was something like the minigun, like I was saying, I'd see like first of all a piece of art that Chris had done, or Paul, even Gary was doing stuff at that time as well, to show me what it looks like in the real world, and then I'd want to see that in game and how it looked in game. So I think we had something called like a Gauss gun was another one, the huge great rocket firing thing. So I did a sound for that. There was things like Persuadertron, I think was another one. There were different lasers, and that was handguns and stuff like that. So again, I had like sample libraries, sample CDs with all gun sounds on, hundreds, thousands of gun sounds. I was one of the first people in the country actually to get the BBC library, and that was back in sort of, when would I have got that? Probably around 1988, 89, something like that, maybe 1990, and of course, when I left Jerry, he gave me those libraries, said I could keep them. It's like 30 or 40 CDs worth of sound effects. Because before that, you used to have to go and listen to sound effects in a listening room at Pinewood and order your sound effects from the guy there. And then when these libraries came out on CD, that was the end of that. You could just take them straight from the CD and use them, straight away. So yeah, I was doing a lot of blending, so blending different sounds to make weapons and explosions and atmospheres and cars sort of wafting past and stuff like that. So yeah, it was good fun, very good fun.
One of the most memorable sound effects from Syndicate is the sound of the Persuadertron.
Well, I got the Persuadertron. It's a very, very good, very interesting story, that, because Sean said to me, it wants to sound something like, did you ever watch a program called The $6 Million Man? Whenever he looked somewhere, he had like a bionic eye. Whenever he looked somewhere, you got this sound that used to go. And I thought, I'm going to try and create something like that, because I think it was either Sean or Glenn, one of those two, had mentioned that they felt like it should be that sort of sound. and so I tried to recreate. I can't remember how I did it, but yeah, I basically tried to recreate that sound, and that's basically what the Persuadertron became.
An aspect of Syndicate's audio that is perhaps just as memorable as its music is the speech samples, such as the robotic "selected" when selecting agents or weaponry.
Now the selected thing, weapon selected and all that stuff. I had a piece of software that used to generate these words, and you basically typed in what you wanted it to say, and it was like it was literally text to speech. So you type in the words that you wanted to say. It couldn't do it very well, so I had to really pick my words really carefully. So selected worked really well. That sounded great on there.
Originally there would be a voice sample for each weapon.
We had stuff like it would say minigun, and it would say it would give the names of the weapons anyway. Yeah, so that was like a novel thing. No one had ever used that before. It was a brand new piece of software that had just come out, and I cannot remember the name of it at all. But yeah, it came out really well. It's one thing that people always say to me. I remember the voices in the game.
Of course, these were cut from the final game due to memory constraints, leaving only the selected line from the text-to-speech software during gameplay, plus one sample each for a successful or failed mission. There was also the iconic line from the police.
Please, put down your weapons.
Yeah, I know that Sean did. Please put down your weapons. So that's Sean Cooper. Yeah. couple of again, we had to really sample them down because anything that was too long was just massive in memory. So I think we were helped by the fact that it had to sound like a radio or a tannoy or whatever.
Syndicate had another ace up its sleeve, something that would drop the player into the game's dystopian future in a spectacular way: the animated intro. Although the few cutscenes in the game were created in-house, the intro itself was outsourced.
Yeah, no, the intro sequence, we outsourced it. It was produced by a company called Arc Developments, I think.
Arc Developments was founded by ex-Elite employees, one of whom was Paul Walker. They cut their teeth doing home computer conversions, such as for Capcom's Forgotten Worlds and Sega's Crackdown. Soon they branched out into creating cutting-edge 3D animations. Bullfrog contacted them about creating an intro for Syndicate.
I honestly cannot remember how that came about. I do remember Les Edgar and Peter. I kind of went down there and kind of had the initial talk, and they wanted me to sign an NDA where I couldn't even tell my partners. And they're like, that's not going to work. You can't. We need to talk to each other. So they kind of caved on that, but they were very, we want this intro doing.
Paul then sat down with Bullfrog's artists.
And then we kind of sat down with, I think his name was Christopher, there was lead artist there. We kind of went through some of his art designs and some of his thoughts on what he could do. The inspiration, which, was Blade Runner. And kind of took that away. And I'd recently transferred to 3D Studio, so I was using that. And I think 2 weeks, I then kind of did the intro, brought it back and went, there's the intro. And again, it was all about kind of that narrative of telling the story and the journey of the kind of the character. I didn't get any assets at all. I got to see things, and I remember being told, whether it's true, I can't corroborate this, that once I'd done the intro sequence, that there was a few things they modified inside the game just to kind of give that parity. I made the gates up. The bubble car, I was like, I need a quick car, and it's a hemisphere stretched and just pulled, and it's like, done. There you go, that'll do. After a futuristic car, and then just kind of painted it up. A few shortcuts kind of took because only had 2 weeks. So yeah, but I really enjoyed doing that. It was good fun.
The very end of the intro was added afterwards by Paul McLaughlin at Bullfrog, a fact with which Paul Walker clearly wasn't best pleased.
I remember being a little bit, let's say, pissed off. At the very, very last sequence where the guy turns to the camera, and that wasn't me. And the lead artist, all the work that I'd kind of put into that, and then all of a sudden for like the lead artist, and it wasn't Chris, I think it was somebody else, to kind of add that and kind of go, yes, I did the intro sequence. It's like, you did 3 seconds, mate, at the end. It's kind of tagged on. So no, that's not the intro sequence. I remember at the time, kind of I was hearing that either one of them was kind of claiming to have done the intro sequence when it was just that slimline piece at the end, say like 3 seconds. 99.9% of that intro sequence was all me.
The Syndicate intro contains several screens in the background. Paul shares a cool little Easter egg for one of the screens. It featured the intro sequence for Armalite 2, a cancelled sequel to Armalite on the Commodore 64.
I think one of the TV screens on there, no one's ever commented, but is a throwaway. One of the TV screens is the Armalite 2 intro. So if you rewatch it, you might see it. It's got a lot of kind of blue and a spaceship flying around towards the camera, and that was the intro I did for Armalite 2. I was just kind of grabbing bits for the various TV screens in the background and like, yep, I'll use that.
The whole intro had to be created within 2 weeks.
Yeah, it was just plain old 3D Studio. Great piece of software. I'd only literally, just learnt it, and so this was pretty much the first thing I did with 3D Studio. And it was kind of great to push the limits with what could be done, and it was kind of balancing things with rendering time. What could I conceivably render? What lights might I do? What light, because with all the shadows, or what could I bake in? And it helped taught me a lot. But yeah, 2 weeks, PC, 3D Studio, and a lot of passion.
Paul created the intro without sound, with Russell doing the music, for which he had a very well-known inspiration.
Well, the intro was meant to... I wanted the intro track, which is also FM actually. I wanted that to sort of be a bit like Holst, the Planet Suite. There's what the first track on the first part on that is Mars, the bringer of... Yeah, I wanted to get a similar feel to that. It's very hard using FM because it's just so limiting in the sort of sound that you can do.
Paul's intro not only blew players away back in 1993 when they booted up Syndicate, but it set the scene perfectly.
I think it does. Yeah, it does a very good job of giving you a snapshot of the rules of engagement. And it makes it very clear from the outset that you're not the good guys in this.
I can remember thinking, my God, this is really trailblazing, this intro, because at the time there was nothing like it. It was so different to everything I'd ever seen, and it just felt like we were really doing something, something cool.
Paul took these skills forward throughout his career, going on to be head designer on Wipeout 3 and Colony Wars 3. Syndicate receives an expansion pack called American Revolt, which featured 21 extra missions. These missions were crushingly difficult, a quantum leap from the level of challenge in the main game.
Of course, we made American Revolt really hard, quite a hardcore experience. Probably a bit of rushing to get it out, to move on to the next, game.
First of all, I would like to apologise for the American Revolt expansion. And it's a salient lesson in game development and balancing. And that is, you never balance a game for yourself. Because you're not going to be... It doesn't matter that you can play it. What matters is that the end user can play it, right?
The extreme difficulty may have had a very specific origin.
Ultima, the game shop in town. There was a guy who worked there whose name eludes me for the time being. I can't remember his name. Anyway, whenever I went in, he would always be like, "Look, I love Syndicate. It's too easy. It's too easy. It's too easy." And at one point, he came in and did a stint as a tester, and he was like, "No, this is too easy. This is too easy." And so I was like, "Right, you bastard." And American Revolt was me making missions for him that were too hard. Which is frankly a terrible idea. And I can even remember when we were making Dungeon Keeper 2, somebody was complaining about how hard American Revolt was, and I'm like, no, you just need to kind of roll with it, and you learn the level. And it was kind of one of those sort of Dragon's Lair approach of you learn by dying, and it's like, oh, I got a little bit further that time, I got a little bit further that time, which is, by the way, that's a really challenging way of building a level to try and make it fun. I wouldn't recommend it at all. And they were like, go on, improve it. And we fired up a copy of American Revolt, and I couldn't do the first mission. And I was just like, okay, no, point taken. It's almost entirely inaccessible. In my defense, it had been a long old time since I'd played it, and this was now running on a Pentium whatever, and there was no frame rate limiting. So it was running at I don't know how many frames a second. It was ridiculous.
It also added a multiplayer mode, which the team had begrudgingly removed from the initial release. American Revolt also had new weaponry such as devastating airstrikes and the clone shield, which allowed agents to disguise themselves as civilians, which was particularly helpful in multiplayer.
But the idea behind American Revolt, if you can look past the difficulty, was that they were a lot more bespoke and a lot more curated. So by then we'd got some semblance of scripting, and we'd also gone to town with the airstrike, which I found was a brilliant way of basically herding the player around the map. But it meant that if you didn't know where the airstrikes were happening, you weren't going to be able to complete that level. So you'd get that far and then an airstrike would twat you, and then you go right. So it was like Edge of Tomorrow, where like each day he's doing the same thing but getting a little bit further, and like, right, that one's going to blow up now. Oh, okay, now that one's going to blow up, so I need to go right, not left. And so it was that kind of that was the kind of motivation behind it. Was, could we make something a little more puzzly, but a more curated and more bespoke puzzly experience? I thought was quite interesting. I just screwed the pooch on the difficulty.
In 1996, a version of Syndicate was released on CD titled Syndicate Plus. This combined both the original release and the American Revolt expansion, and is the version found on modern platforms like GOG today. The same year, a sequel to Syndicate was released, developed by Mike Diskett, Syndicate Wars. In hindsight, Sean would have liked to have developed the original Syndicate idea further.
I think it would have been nice to do like a proper kind of sequel to it. Instead of Syndicate, instead of jumping to Syndicate Wars, was to really develop out the kind of the 2D isometric. Get a lot more detail in that. That's what I would have liked to have done. But it was eager to get onto the next thing, right? Well, what are we doing next? I want to do something else next, and we hadn't quite got into that workflow of, we've got something here, let's build on it and build a sequel that's better than the original. I think some people argue that Syndicate Wars is better, but I would have loved to have had the maturity of, just we've got a good idea, let's build on that idea, right? Let's grow this into something that was, that was like Command and Conquer, for instance. But it's just as young, and next idea, please. Let's move on. I remember we were messing around with a few things, and then I was on Magic Carpet before, basically taking all the source code from Syndicate and moving it into the Magic Carpet engine that Glenn had been developing. So there's a lot of Syndicate in Magic Carpet, especially from a code base and the editor stuff, and so you could call it sort of like the early part, what I felt like Unity, where you were just transferring libraries of stuff across to make it easier to build, so you could focus on content because all we want to do is build games. I didn't want to be building too much code. I wanted to just be, building the gameplay.
Alex outlines a vision for a modern Syndicate sequel.
The stuff you could do now with, actually, this is your target. Well, where is he? Well, we're really not sure, but this is what he looks like. These are his known hangouts, and you can go and you can investigate and you can hack and you can, I don't know, take over CCTV cameras. You're still all up in your airship, or maybe you're in the APC and it's a Lieutenant Gorman simulator, and it's like, right, we've arrived at the thing, and you open the door and then out pile your guys, and all you can do is you can look at these 4 little monitors of your guys' head cams going, oh, we found that guy, and okay, we're switching to thermal, and oh, there's a drone there, we need to take that out, or we need to that's you could get that sort of level of fidelity, and all the while never firing a shot yourself. Like I wouldn't want to do it so that I'm telling the guys what to shoot at. I'm just telling them this is what it is that you want to do, because again, Gorman never tells the Marines go shoot at that guy. In fact, he says stop shooting, but you've put them in that situation knowing that they're going to resolve it one way, and that's the bit that you're tweaking. You, number 3, I want you to be aggressive. You, number 2, I want you to be cautious, and I want you to take your time. I want you to be calm about this stuff. Maybe you're my sniper guy on Overwatch. Number 4, right, Mad Dog, I don't care. Off you go, cause carnage. But you could do that these days with the AI you've got for unit behavior and flocking algorithms, or however you would do it. Seeing your units move through the space where you've gone, right, take the building, and you see them disperse, and you see them take positions of cover, and you see how they react with each other to navigate to that space safely, securely, whilst engaging enemy forces and reacting to things. That, for me, that's where a new Syndicate should be. And certainly not first-person shooter, you absolute idiots. Should there be a first-person shooter in the world of Syndicate? Yes. It just shouldn't be called Syndicate. And they nailed the aesthetic. The aesthetic looked brilliant. The sound looked brilliant. And it's probably, I haven't played it, it's probably a pretty good first-person shooter. Well done. But just call it something else. Call it Syndicate : something. Right? That's fine. But just Syndicate brackets 2012 doesn't cut it.
So are you guys going to start a crowdfunding campaign, or am I?
Well, if you ever get a line on some funding, then do hit me up and I'm happy to jump on board.
Little did they know that they were creating a game that would still be talked about today. Syndicate created a legacy that has lasted over 30 years and counting.
Yeah, we knew it was a good one, and it's still the one. There were probably, and again, it depends on the demographic of the people you talk to now, but like nobody really remembers Populous 2, Populous 3. Nobody really remembers that. They kind of know, and they know of its heritage and what have you, but they never really cite that as this is my favourite Bullfrog game. It'll be the Syndicate, Theme Hospital, or Dungeon Keeper. Those are probably the heavy hitters. Magic Carpet gets an honourable mention as well, but of the big ones, when you talk to people, they'll probably it's Syndicate, or it's Theme Hospital, or it's Dungeon Keeper, I'd say.
I never thought that. I don't know. I never really thought that we were really doing anything. Rather, we were just having fun. Especially at the beginning, especially in my early 20s, I was just having fun what we were doing, and I think the bonuses and the bonuses that Peter would give us based on things like sales and stuff were huge, and it was just like, yeah, it's great, What's the next game? And so it wasn't. I wasn't thinking about money. I wasn't thinking about people thinking that these games were great. I was just thinking, well, they're probably going to have as much fun as we did.
It's strange because I listen back to it now and I just think, oh, what I could do with that game now if I had the sound system I have now. But given the sort of technical challenges that we had then, I think it came out all right actually. And well, it was a #1 game. It did really well for us, so, and a lot of people look at it fondly. So it came out all right. I was quite pleased with it, actually. I mean, it's sort of gone down into sort of like cult status now, the music from Syndicate, and it means a lot to a lot of people. I still get emails from people who love it even today. So quite pleased, really.
When we got a bit bigger as well, and the office got a little bit fancier, it would become the social hub. And so all of the people that we hired, they would generally move to Guildford, not really know anyone, and then hang out with all of the people in the office. And we would hang out at the office, because where else can we play these crazy LAN games, and where else can we find all of these people who are into the same stuff that we're into? So it was much more than just an office. And you'll see, people kind of proudly claim that these days with their work environments, and they're like, we're a family here, we're a thing. But it really was genuinely that, and there was no kind of social engineering behind it. It wasn't something we were trying to push. It was just something that naturally happened because of the people we were hiring, and because of the situation with how everyone was living back then. But yeah, I loved it. Absolutely loved it. And you could argue as well that obviously, so it changed over the years immeasurably as we expanded, as we got bigger, and the EA buyout and everything. But I've probably spent the rest of my career, after leaving Bullfrog, I've spent the rest of my career, as have many people, chasing that thing that we had.
I think chasing that thing that we had is something that we, as fans of these old games, can certainly relate to. Thank you very much for watching.
Selected.